The Whirlwind Barbarian absolutely shreds in the early game and the late game in Season 4. This is easily still my favorite Barbarian build, so let's talk about it. Starting out, we have Lunging Strike, which is one of the best resource generators because it's also a gap closer. I love this one. Obviously, in the core skills, we max out Whirlwind, and the one we go with is Violent Whirlwind because every time you use this for more than 2 seconds, you deal increased damage until it's canceled. In the defensive tree, we focus on using 2 shouts. Those are Challenging Shout and Rallying Cry. The Rallying Cry rune that we're going to use is tactical because it generates more Fury and gives you more Fury generation while it's active. There are 2 passives that we end up getting in this tree, and those are Imposing Presence, which gives you more life, and then Martial Vigor, which is going to give you more damage reduction for elites. On the next tier of skills, the guide we used recommends using Charge. I personally don't. I actually don't recommend Charge until you get to Bolts, which is one of the endgame pieces of gear. But the things we do go for is Warcry, which increases your damage for you and anybody around you. That part doesn't matter, but the next part is it gives you Berserking. The rune that enhances it gives you Berserking for 4 seconds every time you use it. That increases your damage by a bunch and also gives you a little bit of movement speed. This is a great rune. And then a lot of the passives that we go for in this tree, one of them is movement speed that you gain from swiftness over here. Then a few more of the passives is aggressive resistance is going to give us more damage resistance while we're berserking, which is huge. And then prolific fury gives us more fury generation while we're berserking, which honestly, it's about 30 to 40% of the time that you're playing this build, you're in a berserk mode. So this stuff really does matter. And finally, the last few things enhance all of your shouts with booming voice, raid leader, and guttural yell. The next part of the tree is just a couple of passives. You're going to go pit fighter because you're going to get more damage from close enemies and less damage from far enemies. Then you just have 1 point into thick skin, so you can get into counteroffensive. When you do end up getting a lot of fortification, you're going to do more damage based on how much you have. In the ultimate section, we're going to go Wrath of the Berserker because of the Super Saiyan form of it, and then a couple of the recommended things. If you are playing into mace specialization, you do have 3 into Wallop, which is going to increase the damage if they are stunned or vulnerable, and then Concussion, which is going to give you a really big chance to stun enemies if you're using a bludgeoning weapon. So they do lean into that a little bit more on this guide, but that's good. I mean, if that's your thing. Now, the key passive is going to be different for everyone, I feel, because there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can go Walking Arsenal if you want to. This is not my favorite one to use. If you're not having any problems with generating Fury, which you shouldn't for the most part, I actually recommend Unbridled Rage over anything else. However, if you lean more into the Berserker side of things, you would go Unconstrained because it gives you a kind of a big bonus whenever you are berserking. It's almost like Super Saiyan Ascended, if you will. Once all your skills are out of the way, the expertise that I'm going to recommend for everyone is two-handed swords, because every time you do damage, you add a bleed to everything. And when we get to the Paragon board, you're going to get a lot more bonuses for things that are bleeding. So you're going to get extra damage or even damage reduction from it is essentially what we're going to go for. Now, the main aspect we're going to go for is Dire Whirlwind because it increases your critical strike chance the longer you have it channeled, which is kind of amazing. And then a couple of the other offensive ones that we go for is Limitless Rage because you get more damage at max fury. And then Edge Masters also gives you more damage at max fury. And if you don't run Unbridled Rage, you're actually kind of chilling at max fury for a very long time with this build. Now, defensive aspects that we want to do is Disobedience because it gives you armor. Numbing Wrath is going to give you Fortify, and that's important with one of the passives we were talking about earlier in the tree. Iron Blood is going to give you damage reduction from bleeds. Bold Chieftain is also going to give you cooldown reduction, and then Echoing Fury, or whatever the Season 4 equivalent is, for rage generation on shouts. Now, things have changed in Season 4, and stats are a lot easier to understand for pretty much everybody. A lot of things are simplified, so you no longer have to be jumping on a trampoline and petting your dog at the same time to deal bonus damage. So the few things that you do go for offensively, cooldown reduction is a big one. You get to have your shouts up more often as long as you have more CDR. That one's kind of obvious. Resource enhancers, things that are going to give you either more fury or reduce the cost of your fury. And then finally, critical hit chance and critical hit damage are the last ones. Now, for defensive stats, you want to go cooldown reduction again. I think that's important for pretty much every build. And then general life things like armor, all resistances, or, of course, maximum life. Now, the Paragon board is nice and daunting for a lot of people when you're first getting into the game, or even for seasoned players. I don't like looking at the Paragon board just raw. I do like following guides like this on max roll. I will change 30 to 40 points just based on what I find I need more than anything else. So if I need more damage or more life or more defensives or whatever, I'll kind of tailor it to that. But if you use a guide like Maxroll, it looks something like this. On the starting Paragon board, the glyph that you're going to go for is Ire. So this gives you damage while you're berserking, which is fantastic. The next board you go into is Blood Rage, and you use the Exploit rune. That's going to give you more vulnerable damage, and this is a big deal. The one after that is the War Bringer, and you're using Mortal Draw. And this is going to give you extra damage every time you switch weapons for a skill. So if you lunging strike into somebody and then Whirlwind, your damage goes stonks. It's kind of important. After that, we have the Carnage board, and we're putting in Ambidextrous. This is going to give us a little bit more berserking damage, and then it's also going to give us a little bit more damage reduction. This one's pretty cool. The one after that is Flawless Technique with Wrath, and Wrath is going to give us more critical strike damage. And finally, we have Decimator with Disembowel. It kind of keeps your chain going because it's going to, whenever you kill a bleeding enemy, you have a chance to reduce the cooldown of your shouts by however much this is. And that means you can keep the dice rolling and keep your shouts going and keep whirlwinding to where you almost never have to stop except for on bosses, and that's only for like a brief second. So again, Disembowel is very important. So like I said at the beginning of the Paragon section, you can kind of do whatever the hell you want to do with this. This is just what I'm recommending for this build specifically. Now for the endgame gear, you do have two options for your helm. Obviously one of them is Shaco, but you don't get that until way later. Joritz is awesome because you can go Super Saiyan 2 whenever you gain berserking while you're berserking, so you can berserk while you berserk. Or Godslayer for sucking everything in, so you can just be a tornado of death. Now Gore's gloves I don't think are overrated like everybody says they are. They still add a lot of damage, and it's still very important to use these. I don't see build guides recommend these anymore, and that makes me sad. Gore's is fucking awesome. You should use it. Tibalt's is going to offer us more Fury generation anytime we become unstoppable. So if you do go that charge version of this build, you gain unstoppable, I think every like 6 or 7 seconds. So you can kind of generate a lot more Fury that way if you're experiencing issues. And then if you're a little bit more of a professional when it comes to resource management and stuff like that, Ramaldini's or Ramaldini, I don't know how to say this sword, but this sword up here is going to give you more damage per Fury that you have, but you also lose Fury over time. So you get this like decay aspect on it. This is really good for certain scenarios. I personally don't like this because I don't like having to think whenever I'm playing a barbarian, and that's kind of what this class is for. And then obviously if you're so lucky to get a grandfather, unlike me and any of my friends, except for I think Don Mack is the only one. Did he even get one? I don't even know if he got one. But if you get so lucky to get one, obviously, please use it, even if it's just for the badass factor of it. The playstyle for this one is extraordinarily simple. You just shout, and let it all out. And yes, I wrote that on my note sheet. But this means you just have to maintain 1 or 2 of your shouts at all times, and then you just spin to win. You can use your ultimate for bosses, and then you just really need Lunging Strike to either close gaps or generate more Fury on the very, very minimal downtime that this build has. Now, if you, like me, find yourself overburdened with just an assload of rage and you want to be able to use more of it, then go with the key passive Unbridled Rage. Objectively, this build clears through AoE content like a hot knife through butter. It does slow down just a little bit when it comes to bosses, but in general for AoE clearing and staying tanky while clearing, it just absolutely thrives. Without using the key passive Unbridled Rage, this did put up a pretty decent 5 minutes and 49 seconds. This does put it kind of in the back of the pack right now, but again, you can save at least an extra minute to a minute and a half by using Unbridled Rage, as long as you're good at managing your rage. In my opinion, for the Barbarian, this does feel very good. It's actually getting closer and closer. The more you build into a Whirlwind Barbarian that has a bleed effect to it, it starts to feel a lot more like Wrath of the Wastes from Diablo 3, which was one of my favorite builds in Diablo 3, because it's another one that plays super similarly, where you just shout and hold down your one button and everything dies. It's kind of badass. I like this a lot. I'm going to rate this one a 7.3 out of 10. It can be better in certain aspects, but it doesn't need to be. It's just fine. Now, the main follow-up question is, what are you playing this season in Diablo 4? Do me a favor, and if you enjoyed this content, subscribe if you haven't already, and maybe like this video because it's free and it really helps out the channel here. If you want to go the extra mile, you can hang out with me live here on YouTube. I try to stream at least once a week, and the best way to stay up to date in that is to join my Discord server and pay attention to the announcements tab in there. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, and if you're bored, YouTube is going to recommend this next one for you. Happy grinding, travelers, and we'll see you in Sanctuary.